Hello, everybody. Welcome. It is Thursday evening at 6:30, and today is June 4th, 2020. I'm Hunter Ohanian, and I'm the director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives here in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm here with Alexis Heller. Hello, Alexis. How are you?
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Where are we finding you this evening? You at home?
I am at home. I'm in Brooklyn. I've pretty much been here for 3 months, at home, I mean.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm excited, a little nervous about our talk for tonight, but I'm ready.
Well, it's really going to be an easy chat, and we've got a lot of people who have already signed on already, and I know people want to hear about the work that you've been doing. Just to tell everybody a little bit about what's going on here, because of the pandemic, Stonewall has started doing a series of weekly interviews with people from around the country. And I've been very fortunate that a number of people have been wanting to come and participate. Alexis and I worked together at the Leslie-Lohman Museum. We did several exhibitions that we worked on there. And so I've known her for a number of years, and she recently had an exhibition at the Leslie-Lohman Museum in the early part of this year in New York, and we wanted to bring her to have a conversation about being able to talk about that particular exhibition. So to find out about this series of talks, next week, for example, Chris Gray will be joining us, and they will be speaking about gender power. We've had a lot of great people coming on to this series. They only last an hour. If you don't get our newsletter, our e-newsletter, just go to stonewall-museum.org and you can sign up for it. Also all of these interviews and chats are being recorded, and if somebody misses it, they can see it from our website as well, again, which is stonewall-museum.org. And again, if people have ideas of people who they would like us to schedule, please feel free to send us an email and make some suggestions. We did our first tranche of maybe 6 talks, and we're now in the second batch of them, and we're now doing scheduling for the next round of talks. This seems as if this is going to be a reality coming into the future. It's actually really nice because it brings so many more visitors to us, to Stonewall. If this is your first time at a Stonewall event, we're located here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We have the largest LGBTQ library in the world, 28,000 volumes. Our archives are over 2,700 linear feet. That's all the way up one side of the Empire State Building and all the way down the other. There are over 6 million pages of documents, documenting mostly from the last quarter of the 20th century to the present, about 50 years of LGBTQ history throughout the United States. And we do exhibitions, and we do talks, and we do readings, and again, these are something new for us. So again, as I said, today is June 4th, 2020. We are in, every week I say we are in an unusual time. This is just getting more and more unusual. The United States and the world is sort of in the tail end of a big blush of a pandemic that has come through the United States. As of now, there are over 105,000 people have died in the United States, and over 1.5 million have been infected with what's known as COVID-19 worldwide. The economic impact on the United States is untold at this point, except to say that the United States Congress has allocated over $2 trillion to try to assist those with who've lost their jobs and rent, and to be able to help them survive at this time. We've begun to see in all 50 states some degree of economies start coming back and states beginning to open. And as if that was not enough, going on in this country. About 9 days ago, Memorial Day, um, something traumatic happened with regard to the death of the individual who was, quite frankly, murdered. The homicide says that it is I'm sorry, the autopsy says that it is a homicide, brutally murdered for supposedly passing a counterfeit $20 bill. As a result of that, there have been discussions and rallies and riots throughout the United States. I think the last I saw, over 150 cities in the United States have had riots and demonstrations over the last 9 days. Um, the victim, George Floyd, today was his funeral. And I think we'll be seeing more things going on around that over the next several days. But what it has done is it's really kind of heightened for all of us the inequalities that exist in this country around race, around gender, around sexual orientation, around ethnic roots. And we'll see where this leads. I think we're all at a point now where we wake up every morning and we see what's on the news and we see things that are happening, and at times it's hard to take it all in. I think, just speaking personally, it's a time in which I'm personally happy, as hard as it is to take, to at least see a lot of these issues come to the forefront for people to begin to start talking about them again. It's certainly unknown as to where this is going to land, or where this is going to land. So this is the context as of today on June 4th, 2020, where this conversation is happening. As I said, these recordings are all, or these talks are all being recorded, and hopefully people will be looking at this 10 years, 15, 20 years from now. And it's important for us to understand the context of all this. So Alexis, how are you doing all this? That's, it's kind of a strange time that we're in. And so how are you doing?
It is a difficult time. I think it's been a painful time, mostly. I've spent at least the first part of coronavirus really thinking about my role as a cultural worker, art worker, social worker, and really kind of feeling lost a little bit in terms of what my contribution should be. And now, with all that's going on with the protests and the renewed spotlight on the systemic racism in this country and violence from the police, I've again really thought about my role and how I can continue to center marginalized histories in my practice, but also continue to explore my own privilege and ways to use that privilege to uplift Black and Brown communities. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that all of us, regardless of our circumstance, are thinking about a lot. Just to let our audience know, again, we're going to be speaking probably for about 45 minutes, and then we want people to ask questions. We're going to save the questions for the last 15 minutes. We'll go just until 7:30 Eastern time, so save your questions up, put them in the chat. And just to put some context here, as Alexis said, she's a social worker, storyteller, and advocate. She's actually been working to empower LGBTQ youth in settings such as foster care, shelters, drop-in centers, and schools for more than a decade. She's somebody who not only is thinking about it and talking about these things, but she's somebody who's actually had her hands on and been involved in actually trying to help individuals out there. And it's really nice to see somebody who is a writer and a curator who not only has an academic background, but also has a hands-on background in the topic that she is working on here, that she's bringing to us. She's had an independent curatorial practice for almost a decade, starting at Leslie-Lohman, probably when I was there, maybe just before I joined there. She's had a number of exhibitions in New York at Leslie-Lohman, at SMAC Mellon in Brooklyn, as well as alternative art spaces. She has been awarded a number of awards, including from the Andy Warhol Foundation, the One Archives Foundation, and the MAC AIDS Fund. Alexis has her BA in Psychology and Women's Studies from Wesleyan, as well as an MA in Social Work from Columbia University. So let's start with the exhibition that you most recently had this year at the Leslie-Lohman Museum. Tell us about where it came from and what the inspiration was for that particular show.
Sure, sure. So I worked on this exhibition for more than 5 years. And I can actually give some credit to you, Hunter, because you were the one who initially supported the project and bringing it to Leslie-Lohman. So I want to say thank you to you for that. But I was inspired to create this exhibition because, as you said, I spent many years working as a social worker with LGBT youth, many of whom were sex workers. And in that process, in that time, organizing with the young people and really holding listening sessions with them. And together we created a peer education program around harm reduction in sex work. And so when I conceived of this exhibition, I really thought of it as a love letter to those young people and their efforts to lift each other up. It really was a beautiful experience to create that with them. And so, you know, I don't typically work on a show for 5 years. That's a long period of time. I will say I had 2 children in between, and there were some renovations at Leslie-Lohman, but really that time was really important because there are a lot of artworks about sex work, but in the time that I was doing my research, I really had to sift through many different projects to understand the difference between the gaze, right? If you're looking at work, a photograph, let's say, by a photographer who thought, oh, I'll just head down to the stroll, take some provocative photos, come back, you know, and that's it. That's the limit of their engagement with the community. Those images look very, very different than projects that are made by sex workers or people who have a really close relationship with the sex worker community. And so I spent a long time looking for those, because when you look at sex work narratives in, you know, in general art and culture, they're often one-dimensional depiction. And I know that this community has an incredible history and a long, rich history of organizing and community building and culture shifting and culture producing. And so I really wanted to present a show that focused on the complexities and nuances of this powerful community. So that's how
before we look at some of the images, before we look at some of the images, just remind us the dates that the exhibition was at the Leslie-Lohman Museum.
Sure. It was up from the end of September 28th to 2019 through January 19th, 2020. So it was a really nice long run.
Great, great. And if you could concisely tell us what attracted you to this particular part of queer art out there?
Like separate from wanting to sort of create a story that represented a community that isn't often heard from. And again, like as part of my practice, all of the exhibitions that I'm interested in creating seek to bring marginalized histories to the fore and give voice or give access, particularly institutional access, to communities who don't often have them. So Yeah. Yeah. Um,
So can we look at some images from the show?
yeah, before we do that though, I do wanna just give a little bit of a layout or an idea of what my plan is
Sure.
for this talk. So I do plan to spend some time looking at images from the exhibition, talking through history, through many of the histories that were part of the show. But then I also want to give space and give the mic to one of the advisors. I was very fortunate to have three incredible long-term sex worker activists as advisors for this exhibition. So I want to give them some credit. So that's Yin Kwan, Carol Lee, and Kyan Dorashow. And so I want to pass the mic to Kyan, who is a legendary activist, a mother to many, an advisor for On Our Backs, and she will speak about her work as the founder and executive director of Glitz, which is a sex worker organization. She'll talk about the specific ways that sex workers have been impacted by coronavirus and systemic racism, and also offer ways for for listeners to support the movement now. And I'm really grateful to have her trust and her guidance as part of, creating this exhibition. It's really been a very powerful friendship.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Oh,
Should I
hello.
go? Hi. Um, Happy Thursday. Alexis, thank you. On Our Backs was the most emotional thing I've done in a while. I've been a part of this community for over 35 years, never realizing that a lot of the research was not there. There was no research about our sex worker lives, about our history in art. So much of our community is based around art. So much of our lives is a rebirth of art, and having On Our Backs and a rich history of the people that gave us this work, our legends that are still living and our legends from the past, their impact. People like Flawless Sabrina, people like Miss Major Griffin Gracie, people like Carol Lee are the reason why I'm doing this work. Alexis damn sure shook me up with this exhibit. One, we don't know what society is going to think about coming into our world and actually seeing art from sex workers, art about sex workers. This is the first of its kind that really set the tone to having people not connected to sex work actually see a culture that was built and researched and properly put together, especially in New York City. You figure this has been a hub for sex work for years, but never really putting the two together, art and sex work. We creatively have been doing this in the underground scene forever. What you've done was put it on the forefront. As a founder, I felt inspired, one, to be a part of it, but to include legends like Renee Ambranato, who is a 70-something-year-old trans woman, to add her to the wall of elders. That's iconic. That we can still provide an acknowledgement for someone that has lived 70-something years old and have contributed to the sex worker world. And then, ideas come from one idea. So I think Alexis kicked off something really big in New York, because we winded up having more events surrounding artwork and sex work. And this should have happened a long time ago, but it took one person with a really killer idea to bring forth what we need to see. Now we can reference some of this information for grants. We can reference some of this information for further help for our community. Mm. Going into the exhibit, I got to see college kids sing to me in the event, like opera singers, kids in school studying art. Like, that was the take home for me, that young people could just ask the question, are you a sex worker? And I can give them an answer. Honest answer, yes, I was. And I may not be doing sex work now, but I'm selling something different now. And it's the furtherment of this work, and actually have conversations about their contributions on society when they graduate. So what Alexis put together actually opened up a world of acknowledgement. And as we speak, we had International Whores Day on Tuesday. As we speak, young, beautiful, queer, artsy people created images in not only my image, but other sex workers that were on that panel for International Whores Day. As we were talking, kids were creating. There's no greater honor in the world than to have somebody capture your image. And it's now all over the universe. Sex work is international, it's not global. And our contributions set light to a furtherment in community. We're now in museums. We're in places where conversations were not allowed. This was always the backdoor audience for sex work. Actually being in a space with the guy that did the first porn with, I forgot who was at your exhibit, but it was the guy that did the Vanessa Del Rio videos. You know how honored I was to be in that space, to have the Baroness, who I love, be in that space. These are people I definitely looked up to, but also looking across the room at Renee just cry and cry and be so proud that she's a part of something that's a part of a legacy that's now in history. We have a rich culture. What's been missing out that culture clearly is women like me, trans women like me, Black trans women like me, Hispanic trans women like me. We have been the back door to some of the conversations about sex work, and only used in ways that really are horrible ways. But here is an exhibit that sets us on a platform and actually gives the audience a different side to sex work. Not everything about this exhibit is about sex. It's about emotion, it's about spirit. That elders wall is about honor. So it set the tone to a lot of different stuff. There was one art piece that was—
Wait. I'm gonna show some images, and then, and I'm so I'm so happy that you feel so passionate and so recognized, and that the community was really honored in that exhibition, because again, like, that was so much a part of my motivation to do it, right? And so I want to show images, and then I want to invite you to talk some more about, specifically about your work. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about the Wall of Elders, right? Because that's where you started. So let's show everyone. Do you see it? Hold on. Do you see the screen share?
Yep.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay. So thank you, Cayenne, for talking about the Wall of Elders, because it was an idea that really came from you, Anyan, and Carol, right? And so in my research, I did research in many archives across New York, California, Toronto, and I would go, and I knew that there were many leaders of color, trans women of color, who were leaders in the sex worker rights movement. And so I would go looking for them in the archives, and often I would find a folder that had maybe one or two clippings, newspaper clippings in it, if anything. Whereas on the flip side, their white counterparts, white sex worker leaders in the movement, would sometimes have as many as 20 boxes, and they were all very represented in the many archives that I visited. And in talking about that with the advisors, we came up with the idea. Obviously, it was really important to make sure that these women, that these elders were honored and represented in this show. And so the idea to create the Wall of Elders came out of that. And so what you see here are 38 altars to sex worker elders, primarily from the United States. And of course, it is not a comprehensive list. There are so many leaders that deserve recognition. But so these shelves have the names of 38 sex worker activist leaders with small altars to pay reverence to their contributions. And underneath the Wall of Elders is a larger altar created by Pluma Sumac. Pluma also created the mini altars for the elders. Pluma is a multidisciplinary artist, a writer, a sex worker from California. As part of her practice, she creates money altars as a way to have her religious tradition, her faith, in the same space as her sex worker identity. Often when she's working, she doesn't feel like she can bring her faith to that space, and she doesn't feel like she can bring her work to her religion, to religious ceremonies. And so she created these altars with items that represent wealth in her faith. She's from the Ifa tradition. And it's just a really gorgeous, natural items that are part of the altar. She also made these amazing handmade flowers. But the other thing that was really important to her was to include, you'll see a green bowl at the bottom right corner, and that was an invitation for visitors to the exhibition to add their own names, write notes, blessings to sex workers, to themselves, to people from the community, maybe people who couldn't be named, who couldn't be out about their sex worker status, but deserve that love and respect and reverence. And there will be a ritual burning by sex workers, a ceremony to lift those names up. So it really, this piece was a really powerful part of the exhibition, I think, for the elders, as you were mentioning, for Renee, and many of the elders, you know, also mentioned that for them it felt really powerful to be named there, but also I think for the visitors to be able to contribute. So I'm going to go back because I want to talk about this archival piece that I found at the One Archives. So one of the things that was really important in this exhibition was that it really was an exploration of queerness and sex work. And queerness and sex work have been historically conflated in many different ways. For example, in language, George Chauncey in his book, Gay New York, talks about that the word gay meant prostitute before it meant homosexual. And here you see in a cartoon from the Bologna Country Press in 1932, on one side of the image are seemingly queer men, on the other side are sex workers, and according to this, and it says 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And according to this cartoonist, they both belong in the back of a patrol car. And so also, well, so I think what that's about are people who dare to go against or live outside the boundaries of heterosexual, puritanical, white culture. I think the idea is that they deserve to be punished. And, you know, from what we see in history, queer people and sex workers are no strangers to policing, police violence. And so I thought it was just important to recognize that history. This was hanging actually at the start of the exhibition as a way to introduce that, that understanding. Sorry, it's a little noisy here in Brooklyn. Oh, I guess it's 7 o'clock. People are cheering for the healthcare workers. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a really, when we're talking about the archives and people who are missing from the archives, again, we're talking about Black voices, and that includes Black men, Black male sex workers. And so this series was created by Ajamu and Khalil West. It's a series called I Am For You Can Enjoy. Ajamu is a photographer who's been working for 3 decades. He's a sex activist and archivist. His work features predominantly Black male bodies. And Khalil is a scholar, an activist, a sex worker, videographer, also working in London. And together they created this series that really works as an archive of Black male sex workers in London and their experiences. And so you see some of the portraits by Ajamu, and then on the video screens are these really beautiful one-on-one intimate conversations between Khalil and another worker in their homes, on their couch, in the kitchen, whatever, just really having a shared experience of talking shop, of talking about the complexities of being a Black male body, a Black male person in the business, and racial expectations from their clients. And I think it's a really important documentation, again, and an archive for people to have years going forward, because we need more of those, and they've done it beautifully. Okay. So here we are in the meatpacking district, 1980s. It obviously looks very different there today. This photo was taken by Efren John Gonzalez, and he documented the queer underground downtown life, sex worker spaces, sex clubs, leather events, piercing parties, in the 80s and 90s. And here what's pictured is Little West 12th Street, which was home to many sex clubs and bars nearby, but also a transgender stroll. And what I think is so beautiful, I just like, the image itself is just a beautiful image, but I love the way that it really draws you in and makes you feel like you are standing on that corner as well. And putting yourself in that position, you can imagine the conversations that laborers might have been having, talking about their partners, smoking cigarettes, talking about the work, helping each other stay safe, and watching out for each other in between clients. And I also like that there are no figures in the image, because again, it instead of imagining that one person, whoever it was that would be there, it allows you to expand the view to include many different people, women who would have been laboring there. I also think that it's a fantastic documentation of history that has been erased by gentrification. Sex worker histories, these spaces where people spent lots of time and again labored and built community, are often erased by gentrification. And where does that history go? And so I'm grateful that Efren thought it important to document it for us. So I was talking before about policing, right? It's a big conversation that we're all having. And this work is by ChloeJubilo, who was a radical activist, an artist, a performer, sort of a downtown it girl. And she served as a model and a muse for many designers in the 90s and clubs in the 90s. She was diagnosed with HIV in 1987. And after that time became a tireless fighter for her transgender community and people living with HIV and AIDS. She led the first federally funded program for HIV prevention outreach program for transgender sex workers. She also conducted HIV prevention outreach at bars and clubs. And so what you see here in this drawing is, Chloe out conducting outreach and being confronted by a police officer who assumes that she is working when in fact, and she is working as an outreach worker, but he was assuming that she was working as a sex worker, and she was trying to explain otherwise. And I think this image is really important to think about now as well. It was made in 2008, but sex worker activists are currently seeking to decriminalize walking while trans loitering laws, which are often used to harass trans women, arrest them, police them, simply based on their appearance. So it has very much relevant today. Okay, so Kyan was talking about International Horrors Day, and this is a press release that I found at the Lesbian Her Story Archives, and I wanted to share it for two reasons. One, so it's from 1981, and what I think, so what it is, it's a press release about an action that's happening between Black Women for Wages for Housework, New York Prostitutes Collective, Rape Action Project, and Wages Due Lesbian. So it was a collaborative effort to demand state funding for women for their labor, just simply based on their labor. And so this was a collaborative effort between many different people, many different interests to fight for wages for women. And it was rooted really within the sex worker rights movement. And you know that because at the start of the press release, they are celebrating a new book that was coming out about the 1975 protest by sex workers against the treatment and brutality by police that they were facing on an ongoing basis that was affecting their work and affecting their livelihood and their lives. And that action, that protest actually ended in a police riot at the church where they were holding it. And so since that action happened, the International Horrors Day has been celebrated and honored every year since 1975 on June 2nd. And there was an amazing rally digital rally organized this past Tuesday in honor of that. So that's what Kyan was talking about. So yeah, I think it's pretty amazing piece of history to be able to have that. I mean, the thing for me is I love art. Obviously, art does an incredible job telling stories. But when you get to touch archives, touch history, and maybe the DNA or the sweat or the little bit of brown on the paper, it really it brings it alive in just a different way. So again, I'm grateful to archives. So this work is by Ben Cuevas, who is working featuring the archive of Annie Sprinkle. So Ben, for this series, which is called his Reinserted series, what Ben did was he went looking in the archives of Annie Sprinkle and Pat Rocco, who photographed sex worker spaces and, cruising sites in the 1970s and 80s in New York and Los Angeles. And this image Annie took at Show Center, which was a strip club emporium with lots of different rooms, and they also screened films and had peep show booths. And so what Ben did was he took that image and went back to where Show Center used to live and re-photographed it as it looks today. And then inserted the figure from the past, from Annie's photo, into today's landscape. And so, you know, first Show Center was shut down in the 90s by Giuliani and his crackdown on Times Square sex worker spaces. And so I think it's important to think about, or I think what this work is thinking about our again, sex worker histories that are lost to gentrification, but also the palatability of commodities and how they change with gentrification. So, you know, in 1980s Times Square, selling sex was an acceptable thing to do, and now, you know, it's become a beauty emporium instead of the strip club emporium that it was. And so this image also reminds me of, or makes me think about the ongoing racism that Black sex workers, in particular Black strippers, face in strip clubs. This happened, you know, in the 1990s when Show Center closed. I read an article that was an interview with many of the dancers, performers, and they were talking about how particularly Black women had a difficult time you know, working at upscale clubs to begin with, and sort of building a safety net. And then once the clubs closed, we're really faced with precarious decisions about how they can continue to work. And I think we're seeing the same thing today. And I want to say that Giselle Marie, who started the New York stripper strike, is working on these issues again right now, because again, Black women colorism continues to be an issue in strip clubs. So,
Alexis, just say a word or two about Annie Sprinkle.
Sure. Well, how do you say a word or two about Annie Sprinkle, right? Annie is a foremother of the sex worker movement. She is an artist, an activist, a rabble rouser, and just really, I mean, she's contributed so much as a performance artist, as a photographer, as a, she created the first support group for porn stars. She created the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. She has really dedicated her life to exploring sex in a really healthy, open way, and helping other people do that as well through her radical acceptance, and then also has dedicated her life to supporting other sex workers and helping to raise them up. Yeah, she's incredible. If you don't know her work, there's a lot out there to explore. And I would start with the Post-Porn Modernist show, which the archive was featured as part of On Our Backs, and it was really incredible.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, where should we go next? Okay. So, you know, we were just talking about strip clubs, and I want to say that, you know, sex worker history, queer history, HIV/AIDS activist history are inextricably bound with bars, clubs, bathhouses, with that history as well. And so, as I mentioned, ChloeJubilo conducted HIV/AIDS prevention outreach in bars and clubs, as did Richard Berkowitz, who was an incredible HIV/AIDS activist and sex worker. And really it was about the community, again, holding each other up, lifting each other up, and making sure that they were protected, each other were protected. Annie is another one who did a lot of activism around safer sex in porn. But here we see a newsletter called Blackjack Newsletter, which was a sex club created by Alan Bell in 1986. And he created the sex club because what he saw was a dearth of reliable information that pertained to the Black LGBT experience. And so he wanted to create a safe space for men, for Black men to come together, have sex. But part of his parties included safer sex demonstrations, always. And it was, as you can see on the newsletter, it's very, very clear that no one will be welcome unless you're willing to participate in safer sex practices. Alan went on to create the Blackjack Newsletter. He also created BLK magazine, which was a magazine for the Black queer community. I think the Stonewall Archives has an incredible number of those. Am I correct? Hunter?
Sorry, yes, we do have the complete run of BLK, and just today we were working on framing an exhibition about BLK, which we'll be opening in the next couple of weeks, and so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, awesome. And so part of, BLK became a huge publishing powerhouse, and one of the magazines that they created was Black Lace, and I looked for this magazine for so long for this exhibition, and the last day of research at the One Archives, I made an offhand comment to the archivist. I'm like, oh, by the way, do you have this? And he was like, we do, we have 3 copies, and it just wasn't listed on there. Anyway, so I found Black Lace magazine, which was created in 1991 through BLK Publishing, and it was a lesbian erotic magazine by and for Black lesbians, and it featured literature and photography and opportunities for connection, and it's pretty amazing. So one thing that I want to say, On Our Backs, I should mention, takes its name, the exhibition takes its name from On Our Backs, which was a lesbian erotic magazine, primarily in the 1990s and 2000. Many of the contributors to On Our Backs exhibition were either featured in On Our Backs magazine or shot for On Our Backs magazine, and so there's a nice thread there, okay. Pink and White Productions.
I'm just going to hop in for a minute, Alexis, just to remind our viewers that if they have questions, now's the time. They should start posting them on either the chat or the question portion, and we will get to those at the last part of this talk. We'll be ending probably in about 10 minutes, and so feel free to post your quick questions so that we can get people's input as well too. Sorry, keep it going.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Pink and White Productions, and then Kyan, I'm going to pass it back to you, okay? Just to give you a heads up. So Pink and White Productions, I was really fortunate to have the opportunity actually to visit their set when I was out in San Francisco. Pink and White was founded by Shine Louise Houston, who is also the director. It is a series of short scenes, a series called Crash Pad series, also feature-length films that feature performers across size, race, ability, kink, age. They are a queer, ethical, feminist company that is really dedicated to care and consent. They make porn in a different way. And I say that because never before in porn that I've seen have performers at the end of a scene been asked questions about who they are themselves, their safer sex practices, how, you know, their lives. And you can tell, you know, again, by just by being on set, that there is a real effort to create joyous and inclusive porn. And so I want to give a big shout out to them because they were great. And yeah, this talk went by so fast. I feel like I'm just getting started. Okay, so I would like to pass the mic to Cayenne because I do really want her to talk about the work that she's doing with Glitz and how we can support the movement now.
Hi again, everybody. So I'm the founder of Glitz. I had started on a global level, helping people that were in harm's way from all over the world. If you were in harm's way, I relocated you and got you into safety. I've been doing this for a couple of years until 45 came in office, and then, you know, immigration and those rights were taken away from a lot of us. So COVID came into play, and reactionary cause is what actually happened. I got the first phone call to help someone that was in harm's way, and I reacted. I put them into emergency housing immediately. They had COVID-19, they were positive, they needed to isolate. They also were a young, queer, Black sex worker who happens to be in college. So that's how you do stuff. When people are in need, you get up and do it. I'm also on 12 boards around the world. And that sets the tone for me to be able to do more work and better work. So in the light of COVID, I put out a call to community and volunteers, and people answered the call. This work has now turned from one person into 10. We'll get a new sex worker out of jail on Monday. The ERF, the Emergency Relief Fund, are bailing people out. The New York City bailout are contributing. Free Them All for Public Health are contributors. We have 2 Airbnbs in Manhattan in primary old sex worker communities, sweetie. One in Midtown and one on Central Park West. So that's giving sustainability and giving them something that means something. They'll walk away from this not only with getting their needs met, they have a wish list where they can call and where they can ask for stuff and now get some of the sustainable goods that they need to sustain. That's through Free Them All for Public Health. What we're doing is building a bigger sustainability for sex workers. After COVID, you would have to imagine that people are going to be homeless. One of the boards that I work for is there, that I'm on, is there in Florida called Swap Behind Bars. They're a major part of my work. They're also my fiscal sponsors. Doing this work is nothing without having allies. We're now looking at 2 properties to house community in, starting with our elder, Renee Empranato, who's on our wall. She's 70-something years old and deserves the help. This is how you create sustainability. A 70-something-year-old woman needs to be held, and we need to hold her as a community. She should not have to do any kind of sex work out of a truck or live in a truck. So we have to change this. Society's not going to do it for us. Sex workers have to do it themselves. I have been here. I've been homeless. I was suffering from addiction. I've been everywhere where most of us have been, and proud to say I was there. So creating sustainability for people coming home from jail is the option, but giving them a new life, giving them a repurpose in life, setting them up for scholarships and education to go to school. That's how you support community. By giving back, you're able to do the best. And you can donate to glitzink.com, Free Them all for public health. Free them number for all public health. And Glitz Inc. is GLITS dot Inc. No, GLITS.org. I had to fix that one. But please donate. Look and go to the site. Look it up. See the work that we're doing. Contribute.
Well, Kyan, it's great to meet you, and thank you so much for participating in this talk today, because it really has added another layer of really what this exhibition was all about. And so I really do appreciate the time that you've spent. And as you say, people should find your site and they should make a contribution to it, because I think this is a very important part of the queer community that maybe a lot of the mainstream gay organizations don't really pay attention to. And so it's important for us to have this context. So thank you again for your time tonight. So Alexis, to turn back to you, we just have a few minutes left, and we're getting some very nice comments about thanking everybody for the great work that they do. And it's been really very nice to see all of this. But Alexis, let me ask you, as a social worker and as a curator who's put this work together, as we set things up in the beginning here, we're in a different time right now, and you know, economic things are very tough right now, and it's really tough for people to come in contact with each other. And so from your perch, both as somebody who thinks about the art making process and someone who thinks about how a lot of sex workers are out there in the world in a very sort of dangerous time, what's foremost in your mind right now? Tell us a little bit about what you're thinking about.
In regards to care for sex workers, or how I can support them, or and what do you mean?
Well, it's really more about the current situation. I mean, we're in a situation in which it's very tough for people to have contact with other people, and particularly with strangers.
Right.
And so tell us a little bit about what you've been thinking about.
I think I've been thinking a lot about how sex workers are continuing to do their work. I have contact, I mean, I know many sex workers, and some are continuing to see clients at their home. Some are trying to work online or bring their work online, but it's harder because of SESTA FOSTA. Thank you. It's harder because of SESTA FOSTA, which is a law that makes it illegal to have ads even for consensual sex work on your site, on your website. And so it's really challenging. I think people are really struggling. The one thing that is incredible from this community is mutual aid. There are a lot of efforts in the sex worker community to support each other. There are a lot of GoFundMes, a lot of efforts to help each other with food, and how, you know, just even if it's a small stipend, there's a lot of work from within the community to aid each other. And I think that comes from, you know, a century or more of having to fend for themselves and having to fend for the community always, because they're locked out of support from the government. They're not getting coronavirus stipends, and you know, this is a community that has to support each other and fend for themselves. And so I've been amazed by how much funding they've been able to raise and support they've been able to give to each other, and that I've obviously contributed to, or hope, you know.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point, in the sense that this is a degree of support that really has to be grassroots, in the sense that people can't, there cannot be an expectation that they can apply for a PPP loan or for a CARES Act, even though those seem extreme to some degrees. For this community, there's no help in that way. And so the organizations that you speak about are really important. Well, I want to thank you. These hours go by very fast. And so, yes. And so Alexis, thank you. It's great to see you. It's great to have you as part of the series. Thank you for introducing us to Cayenne. It was wonderful. It was great to see some of the work from the exhibition. As a reminder to everybody, to learn about the Stonewall National Museum or to make a donation, please go to stonewall-museum.org. You can learn everything about our archives and our library, all the programming that's going on there. Next week, transgender artist Chris Gray will be here with us, and they will be talking about gender power, and so very much looking forward to that. And so continue to keep on sending us your suggestions. As I said at the beginning, it's a great way for us to build this program. And so it's wonderful to have your input. So everybody just stay safe, not just from the virus, but also from being on the streets right now. Things have changed dramatically in a very real way. And so I hope everybody does stay safe out there. And again, Alexis, thank you for all your help. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.